Well, hello and welcome to today's program, The Korean Economy Beyond Crisis, Korea, U.S.-China Economic Interdependence and Competition. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Tom Byrne. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Society. Minister Chung will cover a lot of ground tonight, but we'll start off with looking back at the 25 years ago at the anniversary of the debt restructuring by Korean banks with foreign banks in the first half of 1988, an event that deserves our attention because it was a pivotal turning point after which Korea started to regain foreign investors' confidence and thus to catalyze the country's rapid recovery from the severe economic dislocation caused by the onset of the Asian financial crisis in the final months of 1997. So we are joined today, it's my great honor to introduce you to someone I've known for a long time but has become a good friend, and it's Minister Chung Duk-gu, who as Vice Minister of Finance led Korea's negotiation team with the foreign banks back in 1998, right here in New York City in January of that year. By the way, one of our board directors who couldn't make it here tonight is William Rhodes. He was vice chairman of Citibank, and he was sitting on the opposite side of the table during those negotiations. However, he played a very constructive role. He got the Japanese banks on board, and also he accompanied the Korean delegation on many road shows after that. Korea's implementation of not only successful restructuring, but also the implementation of the so-called bitter medicine of the IMF's program conditionality. Right after that, Minister Chung was appointed Minister of Industry, Commerce, and Energy. In his new capacity, he primed the Korean economy for a comprehensive reorientation towards reform and opening. After nearly 3 decades of dedicated government service, Mr. Chung retired from the cabinet and became a professor at Seoul National University's Graduate School of International Studies, GSIS, and served as the director of Seoul National University Center for International Finance. Mr. Chung brings extensive China experience as well and expertise. In 2003, Peking University in China invited him as a distinguished chair professor where he taught Korean economic development and open door policy. In 2005, he served as a visiting professor at Renmin University of China in Beijing, where he taught courses on international monetary regime and future prospects of the yuan. On the recommendation of the Chinese government during the early years of Xi Jinping's first term, Minister Chung delivered a series of special lectures and academic seminars alongside policymakers and high-ranking officials from 16 government departments. Currently, Minister Chung is the founder and chairman of the NEAR, the NEAR Foundation, based in Seoul. NEAR has conducted geopolitical research with the goal of achieving peaceful coexistence and prosperity in Northeast Asia since 2007. The foundation most recently published a book titled The Impact of Xi Jinping's New Era on Korea and the World, which will be translated into English and distributed globally by the end of 2023 this year. So I'm really looking forward to hearing Mr. Chung's insights, and the format of the program will be Minister Chung will make remarks, and then after the remarks, both of us will sit on the stage. I have several questions, and then I'd really like to hear questions from the audience, so I'm looking forward to this exchange of ideas. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I'm very much honored and delighted to be here at the Korea Society in New York. Especially, I'd like to thank my all-time friend, Tom Byrne, the president and the CEO of the Korea Society, for inviting me. I'd like to discuss the global economy, but I will add some my personal recollection of my old days of 25 years. That was January of 1998. To begin with, I'd like to reflect on my time in New York. Back then, I was deeply involved in the critical negotiations with 13 representatives from over 200 international creditor banks. But the counterpart was a government officer, because any bank in Korea cannot represent the banking society at the time. The outcome of negotiation would very determine whether the Korea could escape the dire financial crisis and how much suffering the Korean people would have to further endure. During the negotiation, the Korean government successfully reached an agreement. It takes around 17 days from 13th of January to 30th of January, around 17 days. But at the time, at the end of the last minutes of our negotiation, at the time, there was a very shocking international news. That was declaration of Indonesian bankruptcy moratorium. At the time, I was very firm. I asked the representative of international banks, anyone did not receive any $1 of interest payments from Korean banks during last 40 years. And nobody answered. Eventually, we finally decided, go forward. We will guarantee of the total amount of $24 billion. That was a very serious time for me. I accompany around 7 members at the time. The famous people, Byrne, he was my deputy. We had a very sleepless night every day. His situation was so bad. Eventually, in the middle of, around the last week of January, I went to Washington, D.C. to meet the State Department. And then I have a tough negotiation with them. At the time, it's not the question of Wall Street interest, but it's the question of the national security and world security from North Korea and China. At the time, finally, State Department intervened in the course of negotiation. I usually say, my English is not so fluent, but heart-to-heart negotiation finally reached the final agreements between two parties, Korean government and the international creditor banks. During the crisis in 1997, IMF imposed severe conditionalities. Among them, there were 2 significant misjudgments that earned the IMF's reputation of prescribing the wrong medicine and the wrong prescriptions. There are first, the requirement for maintaining strict fiscal austerity even at the lowest level of demand. I think it was copied from Latin American crisis case. That was misinterpreted to Korean case. Second, maintaining high interest rate at around 30% for nearly 5 months. We have only one case in the world, Sweden crisis. At the time, the temporary interest rate was 580% for 3 days. Fortunately, this policy was eventually abandoned at the end of April 1998, when Kim Dae-jung administration inaugurated. The second day, President Kim Dae-jung asked me. At the time, I became the vice minister. Vice Minister Chung, what is the most critical task for Korea? I answered as normalization of our interest rate policy. What is the problem? The IMF conditionality. You must consult with the IMF because in international creditor banks and international credit rating agencies restored our creditworthiness. That's why you have to have a final dialogue with the Gangdusers and Stanley Fischer. I flew to Washington, D.C. I met them. At the time, when I met Stanley Fischer, senior vice president of the IMF at the time, I asked him, what is the abbreviation of IMF? He said, International Monetary Fund. But in Korea, it's not. I am fired. Okay? Eventually, we finally decided not to decide. That is, I asked him, I will increase the money supply by Bank of Korea, and IMF will criticize Korea financial policies, and then eventually Korea's standard interest rate will be down and down up to 5%, because we don't have enough domestic demand at the time. I reported to the President Kim Dae-jung. He said nothing. Okay, that was my own responsibility. That was my own duties at the time, because Korean government inevitably have to violate the IMF conditions. But I decided to implement their policies. Eventually, without consent of IMF, Korean real interest rate in the market was down to 4.3% within 1 month. That was the a kind of determination of a Korean people state. I think that was a similar, at the timing was a little bit different, but Korean people launched the gold collection campaign at the time. At the time, IMF could not criticize of my violation of IMF conditionality at the time. That winter of 1997 and 1998 was exceptionally cold, like the winter of 1950 of Korean War. My intention is not to blame anyone, or highlight the failure of IMF policies. Instead, I want to acknowledge that Korea survived this painful ordeal and emerged as a resilient and strong economic actors in the world. When negotiating on sequence and speed in openness, my American partners often said, "The early bird catches the worm," and good medicine tastes bitter. I sometimes found it discomforting. But in hindsight, Korea was indeed the early bird, needing to endure the bitter medicine for a more mature economy. However, unprepared early opening could bring a country on the brink of financial crisis. As I stand again here today, the memory of that bitter winter and my thick overcoat, and the negotiation process with my notebook all come vividly back to my life. I feel an obligation to address this fundamental question. Why did the foreign exchange crisis in Southeast Asian country spill over to Korean economy? Was it due to political reason, like a presidential election? Or were we simply unprepared, like a firefighter without enough water and equipment? Was it a failure of exchange rate policy or the industrial policy? There are many varieties of deliberation during the time. Since the crisis, I spent years trying to find answers to this question. That's why I became the director of International Research Center for International Finance in Seoul National University. This effort resulted in the book, The Korean Economy Beyond the Crisis. That book was co-edited with the professor Aiken Green. Over the past 25 years, Korea reinvented itself as a mature and competitive economic system. Today, Korea plays a role as a global manufacturer and a technology powerhouse. How was this possible? The comprehensive restructuring of the Korean economy implemented by the Kim Dae-jung administration was harsh. But thanks to this bitter medicine of restructuring, big companies like Samsung, Hyundai Motors, SK, LG, and others were reborn and thrived. The Korean government also transformed its policy toward reform and openness. Through the 4 pillars of reform, that is financial reform, corporate reform, labor and public sector reform, Korean economy moved away from the obsolete, the Park Chung-hee development model. Firstly, Korea adopted a full-fledged, free-floating exchange rate mechanism starting from the end of 1998. And the foreign exchange transactions were liberalized. Foreign exchange reserve gradually accumulated to a sufficient level. Secondly, Korea addressed the underlying structural problem in its industrial sector, developing around the heavy and the chemical industry since 1980s. However, this was mostly assembly-based industry that heavily relied on imported parts, components, and raw materials. As the economy grew, Korea realized that it would face a crisis if it couldn't defend against mounting current account deficit. Consequently, Korea underwent a bold and comprehensive industrial restructuring, shifting to intermediate industry, including parts, component, materials, and equipment. I think that's why late President Kim Dae-jung appointed me as a Minister of Commerce and Industry and Energy at the time. Thirdly, labor market flexibility was totally encouraged. Previously, it was challenging for companies to both employ and terminate workers flexibly. But due to the labor market reform, Korea's capital and commodity markets near totally opened, leading to a restructuring of economy focused on productivity. Finally, the government underwent a comprehensive restructuring of financial institutions, and they injected a huge amount of public funds. Bank capital structure was reconfigured through the capital reduction, and bank insolvencies dramatically reduced by using public funds. While this process may have appeared as downsizing, it left behind only healthy, solid financial institutions with robust asset systems and productivity. The government, business, and the individuals quickly armed themselves with a new vision. This was a ghastly move, for it required collective courage and determination. Through this painful effort, Korea rose again. In the process of overcoming Korean financial crisis, we gained several valuable lessons. Korea achieved compressed modernization in 60 short years, particularly in the real sector. However, highly sophisticated financial sector fell behind in comparison with the real sector. In fact, financial development is something that can only be achieved through the discipline and the enduring hardship under the foundation of transparency and trust. Another lesson learned is that if you liberalize international rate, exchange rate, and the free capital flow almost simultaneously within a short period, it's falling into an economic trilemma is inevitable. Later, we realized that interest rate liberalization should have come first, followed by the exchange rate liberalization. Particularly, long-term capital should have been opened before short-term capital. Accordingly, determination of a balanced combination of sequence and speed of liberalization is the most essential art of the open door policy, especially in the financial sector. Financial system can change, although difficult. However, transforming system, customs, practices simultaneously almost impossible. Attempting to do this, Korea's financial system revealed its vulnerability and instability, creating a huge mismatch between the new regulation system and old customs and practices. In this process, Korean economy grew increasingly. That was one of the underlying causes. There are many causes, economic fundamental causes, and the boom-bust cycle causes. But I usually mention that the most important underlying causes of the financial crisis in the developing nations. That is the mismatch problem. When I have a special lecture in Harvard University, the Professor Jeffrey Frankel gave me a very critical question about the mismatch phenomenon. Later, he wrote very valuable academic paper on the mismatch phenomenon in the developing nations. Many individuals and companies collapsed while enduring the harsh and bitter medicine. The companies, banks, and the financial institutions that survived and overcame this crisis rose to the global level, like Samsung Electronics, Hyundai Motors, and the LG, etc. Escalation of U.S. strategic competition and that is a very critical challenges in the international global world. Since the beginning of the 21st century, Korean economy enjoyed the rapid and enormous Chinese economic boom. That was immediately after Korea's industrial policy change. This industrial restructuring program focusing on the parts and components and the intermediate goods. China imported a huge amount of Korean-made parts and components from the time. That was immediately after the global economic crisis time. Korea's industrial restructuring and the highly productive manufacturing industry greatly benefited from China's economic development. Korea's ability to supply higher quality intermediates and capital goods that was complemented China's rapid growth. In this process, Korean economy grew increasingly dependent on the Chinese economy. And China gained more political influence over the Korean government. Meanwhile, as the competition between US and China became intensified, the relations between the two countries transitioned from mutually supportive complementarity to confrontation. Ultimately, China began to challenge the United States in capital goods market, such as advanced technology industry and platform industry, such as 5G, 6G, etc. During the early days of confrontation, the United States underestimated China's potential for growth. In fact, the rise of China as the world's second largest economy benefited primarily from the US-led globalization and the neoliberalism and the free trade. As China's economy expanded rapidly, its market influence spread like a wildfire. If Mao Zedong peered through a keyhole to look at the world, Deng Xiaoping opened the door to see the world. Jiang Zemin climbed up the mountain to see the world. Now, Xi Jinping is looking down from the outer space through the satellite. The United States belatedly perceived China's expansionism as a significant threat to the national security. Especially after Xi Jinping assumed the leadership, the United States has taken a more confrontational stance and actively sought to counter China. Recently, Xi Jinping seems to be attempting a major structural adjustment of the economy. He seems to be abandoning the previous economic policy focused on real estate market and is shifting the growth axis toward scientific and technological development and expanding the domestic consumption. This marks a significant turning point in China's economic development strategy. Over the years, the United States and China have been locked in a strategic competition. Both countries seem exhausted, feeling their own limits. Chinese economy has weakened significantly along with the market failure in real estate market. To make things worse, non-performing loans and assets hidden by the party and the government have reached an uncontrollable state. President Xi finds himself in a profound dilemma between his stated China dream and the stark reality besieging China. For Xi Jinping, launching an attack on Taiwan or intervening in the Ukraine war and some more concentration on the Middle East crisis is not a priority. Rather, he is more focused on ensuring welfare of the Chinese people, providing necessities such as food, housing, and healthcare. Developing pension system for an aging society is also a vital consideration. It was very critical that Xi Jinping's thought had been totally changed. I think it's not. It's a temporary measure. We should not misunderstand Xi Jinping's way of thinking. As for the United States, decoupling while ignoring economic interdependence has placed the burden of soaring price solely on itself. The United States recognized its limitation in dealing with the domestic challenges and in leading international affairs. Looking back, many acknowledge that a more robust, timely containment should have begun during the early days of Obama administration, about a decade ago. While the two countries have been intensively targeting each other's weakness, they have begun to acknowledge their limitation and explore the possibility of coexistence. The U.S. officials' recent visit to China reflects their effort to reduce tensions and establish some form of cooperative framework in the economic domain. Under de-risking strategy, it is anticipated that U.S. will significantly ease the restriction it has imposed on China, except for areas that related to national security, such as advanced semiconductors, quantum computing, and AI. It is now time for both nations to step back, avoid extreme confrontation, and respond to the reality. They need to establish a floor for managing tension and crisis, and engage in a dialogue to set the red line that they should not cross. The United States needs to support the allies more than ever, even though they are on the same boat with the United States. Each ally has its own national interest to safeguard and the domestic constraints to cater to, making this cooperation with the United States complicated. How the United States can coordinate the differentiated national interest among U.S. allies At this time, the most relied upon and trusted cooperative framework for the United States is a trilateral security cooperation among Korea, United States, and Japan. This framework is being extended to incorporate science and technology, aiming to establish a new defense perimeter beyond the security measures. However, two very sensitive issues remain on the horizon. First is an internal debate in Korea regarding the North Korean nuclear deterrence. They say it's not enough. It's not enough by United States. It's not enough by Camp David Declaration. They want to have their security deterrence measures by alone. The other challenge is the industrial complementarity between the United States and Korea, as well as the prospect of a Korean semiconductor industry in the chip world. Amidst economic interdependence, the relationship between the United States, Korea, and China will revolve around competition, conflicts, and negotiation, paving the way for a new order. However, in the process, Korea finds itself in a significant dilemma concerning its relationship with China. Korea stands at the crossroad. Over the past decades, Korea successfully established industrial complementarity with China, and it resulted in high dependence on China for trade, reaching 25%. Although this dependence has decreased in around 19.5% of this year due to the recent economic challenge in China. The economic relationship between Korea and China still holds elements of complementarity and competition. However, this economic relationship is now under duress. Firstly, trilateral security cooperation between the United States, Korea, and Japan puts pressure on China. The forestry relationship between Korea and China since 2016, due to the deployment of a THAAD missile system, has not fully normalized. The recent reinforcement of trilateral security framework further isolate China. In this context, the U.S. is pressing Korea to reduce its investment in semiconductor production, a key export item to China. While the idea behind it is to expand the U.S.-Korea military alliance toward the economic alliance, it will undoubtedly disrupt Korea's export to China going forward. Some forecasts even suggest that Korea's trade dependence on China, currently at 25%, may drop to 15%. The challenge ahead is how Korea can compensate for the 10% gap. The focus is now on whether Korea and the United States can collaboratively address this issue as part of the expansion of their alliance. For instance, Korea possesses mass production capabilities in some areas that is not present in the United States. When combined with the advanced technology of US, it will create industrial complementarity at a higher level. Korea's advancement in technological capability, highly productive manufacturing ecosystem, and mass production capability has reached a stage where Korea can establish a complementary working relationship with the United States. The United States prioritized the revival of the manufacturing sector as a top economic policy goal. In this regard, United States and Korea are perfectly positioned to form the most productive, effective partnership. Many experts in Washington, D.C. acknowledge this in the course of dialogue with me as a critical factor in U.S. strategic review in the future. Therefore, the term complementarity is poised to become a new keyword in the Chorus Alliance. Over the next 70 years, the Chorus Alliance will evolve into a closer, complementary relationship. Korea is no longer just a small peninsula country in Northeast Asia, nor a divided country that heavily depends on others for its survival. Over the years, Korea has become the existential threat, such as the Korean War in 1950 and the Asian financial crisis in 1997. It has risen to the rank of advanced country that have well-established social safety net, supported by strong market economies and democratic politics. Transitioning from a recipient of aid to donor country, Korea has been invited NATO and the G7. Today, Korea not only contemplate the global issue, but also share the cost and the pains. However, I think advanced country is not an adequate name for Korea. Rather, I would say Korea is yet an advancing country. The advancing state syndrome is about the hidden dark side beneath the radiant external appearance of South Korea. Nevertheless, I remain confident that by overcoming the advancing state syndrome, Korea will eventually join the rank of truly advanced country. While Korea's comprehensive rational national power is within top 10, sometimes they say 6th or 7th, more effort needs to be made for Korea to be ranked within 10%, top 10 countries in terms of quality of people's life. Korea's future path involves making free choices followed by taking full responsibility, fostering political trust among citizens, and ensuring that people's life and value are safeguarded by the government. We pursue a country where the sick receive treatment in the world-class healthcare system, and where social safety net help those who fall behind recover. This is the grand vision of Korea's future. As such, it is a task of our current generation to overcome the advancing state syndrome so that the next generation can go forward stable and confident based on this foundation. This is yet another miracle to achieve, surpassing the achievement of the past 60 years. In this progress, Korea and the United States will sail on the same boat in pursuit of a shared dream. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you for your, to warm us all up with your thoughtful comments. We'll probably have to go into overtime if everyone is thinking of 60 minutes, so I hope everyone has a little more time. So, I was thinking about how you juxtaposed the wintry conditions in January 1998 when you were up here in New York doing the restructuring of the bank debt, and with the Korean War, how the 1950 was similarly a very cold winter. And I think both experiences were actually a crucible for Korea, in which so there was a situation of severe trial in which different elements were intermixed, leading to something new and something stronger. So in the case of the Korean War, of course, it was the right after the armistice was signed in July 1953, you had the U.S. and Korea signing a mutual defense treaty, and the following year was ratified by Congress. So back in January 1950 and even June 1950, that was probably unimaginable that that would happen. And the alliance has endured. It's been proved resilient through many challenges for the past 70 years. So likewise, from the Korean financial crisis, or the IMF crisis that you were often is referred to in Korea, you had this rebirth of the Korean economy, where the deep structural changes in the banking sector, monetary policy, exchange rate policy, the industrial sector. But it was a severe trial, that's for sure. So I like how you juxtapose those two times. I wanted to open with a question, kind of dig back to touch on the book that you wrote with Barry Eichengreen. You co-edited it. So it's the title is The Korean Economy Beyond the Crisis. And I use this in the Sovereign Risk course I teach at Columbia University. I'm glad to see I have some of my students here. Good to see you. You know it in that book. By the way, we did invite Barry Eichengreen, but he got tangled up in travel to Morocco with the IMF World Bank annual meetings to be here tonight. But you note in the book that at the deepest level, it was a tension between when you say, you know, what caused the crisis? Why did this crisis spread from Thailand to Indonesia to Korea? So you note that in the book that at the deepest level, it was a tension between institutional inheritance and current economic circumstances that was the root of the crisis. Having exhausted the scope for growth through catch-up, Korea needed to move toward a more flexible, innovation-friendly economic model. Yet its chaebol, bank, government-centered arrangements remained locked in place, placing the prospects for continued growth at risk. It was this tension that set the stage for the crisis that erupted at the end of 1997. So my question is, and bringing in your knowledge and experience on China, are there parallels with China's current economic situation? Perhaps in the case of China, it's the state-owned enterprise, local government financing vehicles, state-owned bank, and government-centered arrangements that are contributing to the slowdown in China's economic growth, which is forecast in the IMF's latest World Economic Outlook to ebb to 4% in 2024. So is there a deeper crisis that lies ahead for China? And perhaps what also makes me think of that, so back in 1997, you had in Korea the Sami Steel and the Jinro bankruptcies, which surprised everybody, surprised the government. And in China now you have the property developers, the Evergrande and Country Garden property developers defaulting on debt. Their share prices have collapsed. Are these the canaries in the mine in China signaling a lurking countrywide financial stress, perhaps similar to Japan's lost decade in the 1990s? So how would you react to that?
Actually, we have to decide between two. One is totally socialist economy, like North Korean economy or something like that, totally controlled by the government. The other is the market-based economy. The China is in between. Okay. When the Deng Xiaoping regime was inaugurated, they announced that the new promise of division, politics and the economy. That was a very fresh message to the rest of the world. Every entrepreneurs rushed to China for investing and trade. But all of a sudden, upon the Xi Jinping era, they denied. Politics and economy is totally intertwined right now. That's why there must be a very high level of uncertainty and unpredictability in the Chinese economy. That's why I think the Chinese case is quite different from Korea. Mm-hmm. We were moving toward the internationalization and the globalization. But China was in between the government and the market economy and the mixed. And they announced the separation of domestic politics, communist politics, and global economy. But they denied now. How can we enter the Chinese market? It's a very serious issues. And second, I think they do not know what is the real contents of the market. Market is really a very soft entity. The debt is hard, but the life is very soft. Okay? The dead wood is hard, but live trees is very soft. But the Chinese design for national development strategy was wrong at the initial stage of development because they denied the very fundamental promise to the rest of the world. That's why many Western big entrepreneurs, investors are lingering around whether they repatriate their money from China or not. Some of the Korean big company, semiconductor industry, asked me my advice. The time I usually say, economy is a live animal. That's why nobody knows what will happen in the next following years. Please remain as it is. But inside my mind, there are lingering questions about the Chinese economy. Because on the part of the recent Chinese economic downturn and the turmoil of the real estate market, we can see that it's quite a different manner in handling that crisis, market failure. Xi Jinping's opinion, attitude, is quite different from Deng Xiaoping. Because when the market failure is emerged, government should not pay for it. If market failed, in that case, eventually government purchased the asset. And that asset will be operated by the state-owned enterprises or something like that. But I will give you some proverbs on the market economy. Market is angel. Sometimes fail and becoming the devil. Okay? when the government entered the market to control the devil, if government stay too long in the market, in the case, government will become the dictator. Mm-hmm. It's a very important perception on that. But I think I do not think Chinese economy will at the brink of bankruptcy, because they have huge banks and state-owned banks, and the top 5 of the world. But for the time being, they will support the managing their crisis season. But I think Chinese economy potential growth potential will be dramatically decrease. Recently, I received a report from Bloomberg International Forecast that they say the growth potential of Chinese economy in 2030 will be 4%, and 2040, 2.5%, 2050, 0.9%. And then, of course, nobody knows. Maybe Xi Jinping, after Xi Jinping regime, who will become the next ruler? I don't know. His way of thinking, his perception on market, but the general trend is such like that. That's why I think that China should decide. The socialist politics and economic policy will make an enormous mismatch problem in the existing the market economic systems.
Right. Yeah, I was in China at the time the third plenum decisions were announced. The first party congress was probably back in 2013. I actually forget the number of the party congress is, so I don't want to say a number. I have a number in my mind. But anyway, one of the highlights of that, we had a meeting at the State Council. It was when I was at Moody's, and the official was very eager and very proud and very optimistic, because he said the guiding principle of those decisions was that the market will allocate resources. Well, I think just the opposite is happening in the case of China. So I would agree with you that there's always market failures, but if it's often the market is best in self-correcting the failures and then moving on just in general. So I don't know. In my mind, I still think that China runs the downside risks the risks are on the downside, and Japan didn't collapse either in 1990, although the growth rate did. In China, the deflation, financial system took a while to clean up. It wasn't until Koizumi came into power in 2002. And but meanwhile, there was a lost decade of growth, and growth was like maybe 1% in real terms. I wonder if China is moving along that direction, because the local government financing vehicle debts are still murky. They're still being evergreened, right? Mm-hmm. And very similar to the situation in Japan. Anyway, I don't know if you were that pessimistic about China. Yeah. So if I can continue on this topic of the issue of China and bring it up to what we're facing with the Biden administration's policies. There's many sensitive issues that remain on the horizon between the U.S. and Korea, even though the alliance seems to be very robust and it's multidimensional now. Korea is a huge provider of foreign direct investment into the United States, for example, which is something new, often in cutting-edge technologies. But there are sensitive issues, and one is you bring up this notion of industrial complementarity between the U.S. and Korea. where Korea has this big industrial manufacturing capacity, and the U.S. has advanced technology and know-how. We actually saw this work during the pandemic when a U.S. company or U.S. companies transferred messenger RNA technology to Korean biopharmaceutical companies to enhance global production of vaccines. But is this industrial policy unfolding in the Biden administration, embodied in the CHIPS and Science and IRA Acts? Is it fostering or imparting friction in this complementarity between Korea and the U.S.? I mean, what's your early take on where this will lead in terms of economic relations between the U.S. and Korea?
I want to reiterate the importance of Camp David Declaration. First one is we retie the missing link between Korea and Japan in the triangular formation. Korea, United States, very solid line. Mm-hmm. Japan, United States, very solid line. But Japan and Korea is a dotted line. Mm. But finally, President Yoon Suk-yeol decided to cut the Gordius knot between Korea and Japan. It's very complicated decision, along with the domestic political situation. But now, that is the very monumental decision, because nowadays we have the many conflict, many war, and many quasi-war all around the world. There is no fundamental multilateral framework for ceasefire at the moment. Mm. United Nations is not working well, and even the permanent member of UN Security Council Committee, the two is the very serious totalitarian government, Russia and China. That's why I think in the Northeast Asian security framework, we have a very good monumental decision making by Biden and Yoon Suk-yeol and Kishida. Okay. Problem is under that the security framework, how can we make the sustainability building of that Camp David situation? That is the balance of national interest. Mm-hmm. As you mentioned, Biden administration is focusing on the rebuilding the manufacturing sector in American economy. But personally, I totally denied the possibility of that, because there is no manufacturing ecosystem in the United States. Mm-hmm. Nobody wants to work hard, okay? And there are many companies combined together, like a Korean Jabil, okay? But in United States, the companies is a kind of a dot, many dot in the American societies. Mm-hmm. That's why, as time flows, the level of science and technology be higher and higher. We need a manufacturing ecosystem. Right. That's why during my stay in Washington, D.C., I received many questions from government officers and think tankers about the potential complementarity with Korea in the manufacturing sector. But that must be a very important steps for making United States to build the manufacturing ecosystem. But most serious part is semiconductor industry. Nowadays, we have around 40% of our total export to China, that is a semiconductor. Around 25% of the total GDP of Korea is from the semiconductor industry. In this connection, there are widespread rumor that the paradise of Korean semiconductor industry will be fading out. It should be moved to United States. And sometimes, every month, the Commerce Department of the United States handle that issue to invest level amount of Korean semiconductor manufacturing company to China. But if we want to increase the capital or the establishment of a new company, new factory of semiconductor, we need around preparatory steps for about 5 years. But every month, Commerce Department is dealing with that matter. That is a very critical matter. That's why I want to advise the American entrepreneur and the government officials in dealing with this matter that we need a certain type of the fixed agreement between Korea and the United States. Without that, eventually, China will have an enormous amount of intellectual property theft and huge amount of hacking for the evading that the highly advanced technology of semiconductor. That's why it's a very critical moment for that. Okay.
Right. Well, it sounds like the industrial policy in the Biden administration, at least in the semiconductor industry, is imparting a lot of friction on the economic relation, but also on the companies that produce semiconductors. It's almost as if this offshore regulatory, this expansion of American Washington D.C. regulatory powers are applying to trade between two countries that aren't trading with the U.S. It's a new era we're in. I wanted one last question before turning to audience questions. You said something that was really intriguing in your closing remarks about Korea. And I've always thought of Korea, and at least Korea recently, as an advanced economy, an advanced country. And so does the IMF and its global economic groupings. Although, of course, when we turn to the financial sector at large, MSCI, the global index provider, has again retained Korea in the 24-member emerging markets index, rather than an upgrade to developing market status. Setting that aside, why do you refer to Korea as, if you can elaborate a little more, as an advancing country rather than advanced country? Are you mainly referring to socio-political factors, or are you are you really referring to fundamental aspects of the Korean economy?
Actually, the many Korean stock ventures investors are nervously awaiting for entering the MSCI because economically and financially, Korean market is fully qualified for that criteria. But the question is the environmental, in the social, political, environmental, especially North Korean threat, the so-called Korea discount in some areas. But recently we deleted the one factor of Korea discount, that is accounting transparency.
Right.
Now we are entering in the new international accounting standard,
Right.
and we are fully qualified as accounting transparency. Now, still we have North Korean threat, but it's fully defended by the Camp David declarations.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is the regulatory framework of the policies, especially we have some the problem in the Yoido politics. They are fighting each other, and the ideological dispute still about that. That is the one part of advancing status syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
But I think next we are expecting that the next following 1 or 2 years, Korea eventually enter the MSCI criteria.
Right. So yeah, the so-called Korea discount, I always thought it had a lot more to do with deficiencies in corporate governance and transparency rather than the geopolitical risks with North Korea. That being said, there's one anecdote I have. So, well, you were negotiating with the American banks and with the World Bank and the Treasury involved here in New York City in 1998. I was over in Korea trying to figure out how much debt does Korea owe and what the foreign exchange reserves were, the actual reserves, the liquid reserves, usable reserves, and the official who reported to you, Byrne Yang-ho, or Yang-ho Byrne, was in charge of the team that was interacting with the rating agencies, and we were trying to get information, this basic financial information that we would get from just about any other country that we went to, except China, of course. And so we're in there, and it just happened. The two of us, I was the lead analyst. My Korean was much better back then. We could understand the to and fro, and one of the officials was saying, "No, we can't give them that information." Almost like China, that's nebu, or that's internal. And Byrne Yang-ho just got exasperated, and he said very loudly in English, "Just give them whatever information they ask for," which was a big sea change in terms of availability of data in Korea. But so the advancing country, I think, you're more worried about the political challenges and social political challenges. Perhaps the low birth rate and the demographic pressures is part of that. But I mean, other advanced countries have that too, as well as developing countries. Well, why don't I open up to questions? And if you could identify, we have a mic that will be passed around, Chelsea. So just identify your name and then your affiliation, please. And out of the interest of time and to get as many questions as possible, let's keep the questions question-like. Okay, so right here, Jessica.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Taylor. I'm a U.S. Forces Korea alum and now at Princeton doing my PhD on semiconductors in cooperation with the defense supply complex with the U.S. and alliances amid crisis like the Asian financial crisis. So real quick, my question would be, with South Korea being concerned about China in semiconductor cooperation with China versus the United States, Also concerned about TSMC and Samsung's cooperation, or rather, as they compete in the space, especially for advanced semiconductors, and along with the U.S. and South Korea trying to increase their defense cooperation in defense articles. If the Chip 4 Alliance ever gets off the ground, how does South Korea balance all of these things along with the concern about the competition with other industries and partners and China?
Okay. We have very recent news on the big drop of semiconductor sale by SMIC in China, because they have short of the equipment and the parts, the components, and owing to the very tough, very solid intervention by the U.S. Policy strategies to ban the export to China. Actually, Korean company, the Samsung and the SK, they are very much strictly follow the U.S. directions of commercial department. They have a day-to-day dialogue between two right now. But I think China may have a special shaking hand with Korea, because recently the Chinese government are very much eager to shake hand with Korean government, and they want to participate in the Korea, China, Japan triangular summit, maybe possibly during the December or something. But I think the China cannot produce the cutting edge level of semiconductor by alone without having the transfer, technology transfer from the Korea or United States. That's why Xi Jinping's is very much a difficult time to persuade domestic entrepreneurs, because they have a complaint, and the domestic entrepreneurs strong complaint on Xi Jinping's recent decision and confrontation with the United States. That's why United States have thought that the last resort of the curbing the China's expansionism is just the semiconductor. The quantum computing and the AI, China is well developed, almost the same level of the United States right now. But question is cutting edge semiconductor in the future. That's why the United States have a very good combination of strategy. On the one hand, have a strong tie with allies, especially with the European Union. European Union do not want to follow exactly the U.S. Commerce Department's direction. They want to diversify, differentiate their market instead of China concentration. But Korea and Japan and the Netherlands, they, of course, Netherlands is belonging to United Nations, European Union, but they have a good combination policy combination with the United States. That's why, in short, I think China's semiconductor industry will be totally diminishing next following years. That's why they are very much concerned about the new floor to dialogue with the United States, and for easing their regulation and the ban to ban the export to China by Korea and Taiwan structure. That's why I think I don't know what will happen in the future, but in my understanding, United States share a lot, shake hand with China in the field of cutting-edge semiconductor industry. And so that's why there's China look at the Korea as some weak connections, as they concentrate their Korean enterprises. Sometimes many of Chinese officials, Chinese entrepreneurs, they abide by the meeting with Samsung Electronics employee technicians to make a good solution for tracing the new high-tech technology from Korea. But Korean government is very firm not to leak any kind of cutting-edge semiconductor industry technology in the future.
So the upper hand that the U.S. has on this this semiconductor war with China is very strong. What you're saying,
yes,
and maybe the
yes,
in the near term, the only out for China would be stealing industrial secrets and hacking and all that. Unless, but what over the longer run, what policy changes could China make to allay the concerns of the American government on China's use of semiconductors, advanced semiconductors? Is there anything they could do?
I don't think so. I think United States is very firm, and U.S. government will not give in any part of the semiconductor.
Interesting.
Because it's the last resort for making contain the China's expansionism,
right,
in the especially why the United States is so serious about the semiconductor. There's a closely related with this national security issues and a high standard of new weapons,
right,
aircraft, and the shipbuilding industry, etc. That's why it's very serious for United States. The U.S. government is concentrate on the 3 points. One is cutting edge semiconductor. Mid and low level, they will ease the regulation on exporting to China, but upper levels, advanced level, there is a very firm.
Right. Okay. Maybe we can get one or two more questions. Please raise your hand. If Ron. Yeah, but it's coming.
Ron Schramm, Columbia University. I really enjoyed the talk. It was very high level, and I found it quite interesting. My question is, China wants to create a middle-class society like Korea and to have disposable incomes rise and have consumption rise. What can China learn from Korea, and given China's own political constraints, what can it actually do when it learns from Korea in terms of its goal of a middle-class society with high disposable incomes and high consumption levels?
Actually, China initially wanted to follow the Korea's development strategies at the early stage of development, especially until Hu Jintao, first 5 years of Hu Jintao regime at the time. At the early Hu Jintao regime, I consulted with Prime Minister Wen Jiabao and teaching in Peking University student. At the time, the late President Park Chung-hee's design for expanding the belt of middle income class, that was the owner-occupied housing. Every Korean wanted to have owner-occupied housing. Government strongly supported to have the middle class will have their own property itself. That we may recall early days of the Lee Seung-man administration. All of a sudden, he liberalized the landlord, and without cultivating the farmland, they will lose their property, land property. Instead, farming families own their new ownership at the time. But in case of China, I think the initial step was increase of the wage and salary. When during the early Hu Jintao regime, at the time, their industrial structure was a very low level of manufacturing, as many of small and medium enterprises to invest to China, and the workers, Chinese workers, have a very low level of wage and salary. But all of a sudden, they have a new step for industrial transformation. That is around 2 or 3 times increase all of a sudden of the state-owned enterprises wage and salary at the time. It's widespread to all over every corner of the Chinese territory. That's why a general level of wage and salary has upgraded all of a sudden. Eventually, Korean investors to China from this small and medium enterprise are bankrupt and repatriate the capital to Korea again. That was the one step. The second one is they don't have income tax. Now, they don't have income tax and the real estate tax right now. It's quite a peculiar stance over the income distribution. Still, Xi Jinping regime do not have any plan to introduce the kind of income tax and real estate tax, etc. That means that is a kind of middle income class building, along with that the cities and towns they has been building the huge amount of the apartments all over the cities and towns. And they want to have the owner-occupied housing, which is following the Korean experience. And then many of middle-income owners have their own house right now. But the critical question is, nowadays, the apartment price value is dramatically lowered, maybe around 40% reduction. That's why it's a kind of the very harmful situation for making wider middle-income class in China.
Okay, maybe Steve, a quick question, and then we'll wrap up with you.
Another one here?
Yeah.
I have a question.
I think we're in a double overtime, by the way.
Steve Cardman, quick question regarding the chaebol. We know that the chaebol were identified as a major contributing factor to the financial crisis in 97, 98. But the chaebol still loom large in the Chinese economy, especially the largest chaebol. Yeah. Should that be a concern?
In Korea or China?
No, Korea.
Korea.
Yeah.
The role of the chaebol, they're still very important. Should we consider that a cause for concern about the direction of the Korean economy?
Let me introduce our systems. We have a strong regulation on chaebol systems, especially our inheritance tax is almost 70%. That's why when Lee Gun-hee, of a Samsung owner, died, he donated almost all of his inheritance, and some pictures and some stocks donated. As time flows, chaebol will be perishing out in Korea. As Lee Jae-yong, the new chairman of the Samsung Group, announced that he will not inherit the ownership of Samsung Group. In that, Korean chaebol will be another big company, just a big company, not chaebol, and separate and distinct accounting unit. Okay? Without owner, the chaebol system cannot be survived in the future. I know some of chaebol owners, but they say they do not want to inherit their property to their son or daughter, because I am expecting that the new mood of the donation of chaebol owners to a neo foundation or some think tanker in the future.
Maybe we could have a Korea Society Foundation.
Korea Society Foundation, okay, too.
Okay, well, thank you all, and thanks for your for staying. I think we have some food, right, for those who want to stay. The usual mandu, dumplings. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oops, I forgot about this.